What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size.
What if your anxiety isn't the enemy, but a sacred messenger? What if the very thing you run from is actually the path to your freedom? We live trapped in a paradox. That which hurts us the most is often what most needs to be heard. And anxiety is a voice screaming in the desert of our inner silence. Gabor Maté put it bluntly. Don't ask why you have anxiety, ask why your nervous system never learned to feel safe. Anxiety has become the new invisible pandemic. Silent, ever-present, and increasingly normalized. We feel it in the tightness in our chest, in the insomnia that never forgives, in the restless mind that races without pause, endlessly anticipating futures that never come, and punishing itself for past that cannot be changed. But behind all the noise lies a forgotten truth. Anxiety is not the problem. It is the symptom of a profound disconnection from ourselves. Carl Jung once said, "Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering." In other words, when we are unable to feel what we truly need to feel, anxiety arises as a distorted expression of that unprocessed pain. Many try to calm it, suppress it, numb it. But few dare to listen to what it wants to say. Because behind anxiety, there is no madness. There is a suffocated soul, a trapped energy, a postponed truth. Anxiety is not the enemy. It is the messenger. Yet we live at war with it. We fight it with pills, with distractions, with noise. We've grown used to living anesthetized, running from that knot in the chest, that looping thought, that invisible pressure that won't let us sleep. And still, anxiety persists. Why? Because it is not a flaw in your biology, nor a curse of your mind. Anxiety is a signal, a teacher, a mirror. Deep down, anxiety arises when who we are and how we live are in conflict. When there's something inside us that refuses to be ignored, but that we don't know how to face. Carl Jung said it clearly. What you resist, persists. What you deny, submits you. What you accept, transforms you. But how do you accept something that consumes you? How do you look directly at what makes you tremble? Most of us were taught from childhood to avoid pain. Not to cry. Not to show fear. Not to fail. To bury everything that hurt in a dark corner of the soul. Until that corner becomes a cage. And anxiety is the scream of what we've locked away. It's the body saying, "I can't hold this silence any longer." It's the soul asking, "Please, see me." When we feel anxious, we assume something is wrong. But maybe, everything is working perfectly. Because anxiety only appears when we've ignored our truth for too long. It's the alarm that rings when we've been sleepwalking through life. And if we listen, if we find the courage to stop running, to be still, something shifts. We begin to realize that anxiety is not the root. It's the consequence. It's not the problem. It's the call. A call to reconnect. To return to the body. To face our wounds. To remember who we are beyond fear. But of course, this isn't comfortable. That's why we prefer to silence it. We chase quick fixes. Medication without reflection. Productivity without presence. Approval without authenticity. And so, anxiety becomes chronic. Because we didn't give it what it was asking for. Attention. Compassion. Truth. Gabor Maté says, "Don't ask what's wrong with me. Ask what happened to me." That is the root of the inner conflict. Anxiety doesn't arise because we are broken. It arises because we've spent too long disconnected from ourselves. And now is the moment to pause. Not to cure it. Not to eliminate it. But to listen. Because maybe, anxiety didn't come to destroy us. Maybe it came to set us free. The hidden language of anxiety. Anxiety is not a system failure. It's a message, encrypted. A kind of forgotten language the soul uses when it can no longer speak in any other way. In a society that values control, performance, and perfection, feeling anxious is seen as a failure. A symptom to be eliminated. An obstacle to productivity. But, what if that's not true? What if anxiety isn't the problem, but the messenger? Carl Jung warned us. What you resist, persists. What you accept, transforms. When we fight our anxiety, we feed it. We give it the shape of a monster. But when we sit with it, truly, with presence and without judgment, something begins to shift. It starts to reveal its true face. Because anxiety doesn't come from nowhere. It arises from the conflict between who we are and who we pretend to be. Between what we truly desire and what we believe we should desire. It is internal dissonance made symptom. It is the soul shouting at the ego. Wake up. Gabor Maté speaks of this with brutal precision. He says all anxiety is a sign of disconnection. Disconnection from oneself. From unfelt emotions. From unspoken truths. In his work with addicts and chronically ill patients, he found that the body begins to scream when the mouth has remained silent for too long. And that is anxiety. A scream held in. A frozen emotion. A fire trapped beneath the ice of control. From a Buddhist perspective, anxiety is not an enemy, but a symptom of attachment. Attachment to outcome. Attachment to identity. Attachment to the desire for life to be other than it is. The Buddha said, desire is the root of suffering. But he didn't mean only superficial desire. He meant the desire to avoid pain. To escape discomfort. To control the flow of the river. The more we swim against the current, the more we drown. Anxiety is that inner current. The one that rises when we no longer trust the flow of life. And here we arrive at a vision few dare to face, inner alchemy. The ancient alchemists were not merely trying to turn metals into gold. At least, not only. They sought to transform consciousness. To transmute the lead of dense emotions into the light of spirit. In alchemy, anxiety would be the nigredo, the black stage. The initial chaos. The moment of decomposition. Where all that is old begins to break down, so that something new can emerge. You cannot avoid that stage. You cannot skip it. You can only go through it. And in that crossing, you become gold. Because what we call anxiety is, in truth, a radical opportunity for transformation. It is the signal that something inside you is dying. A belief, an identity, a story. And something more authentic is trying to be born. But birth is painful. It hurts because it means losing control. Letting go of certainty. Stepping into the unknown. And yet, only in that emptiness can you begin to hear yourself. Your soul. What truly matters. Have you ever given yourself permission to feel your anxiety without trying to silence it? Have you let it move through you, speak to you, show you its symbols? Because yes, anxiety speaks in symbols. Sometimes it shows up as pressure in the chest, an unspoken truth. Or a lump in the throat, a repressed emotion. Or trembling hands, a desire to act that you haven't allowed yourself to express. Alchemy is not about curing this, it's about translating it. It's about asking yourself, what is this anxiety trying to ask of me? What part of me is dying, so that something new can be born? That is the key question. Not, how do I get rid of anxiety? But, what is it trying to show me? The forgotten root of suffering. Anxiety is not the enemy. Disconnection is. Disconnection from your body. Disconnection from your emotions. Disconnection from your soul. We live in a hyperdigitalized, cognitively saturated world. A world that rewards speed, efficiency, and appearances. But what happens when our biology, our emotional history, and our spirit can't keep up with that pace? What happens, is what we call an anxiety crisis. But it's not a crisis. It's an awakening we didn't know how to interpret. Gabor Maté insists on something revolutionary. Trauma is not what happened to you. It's what happened inside of you as a result of what happened to you. And many times, what happened was a shutting down. A break. A disconnection from what we were feeling. A self-exile from the present moment, because it didn't feel safe to be there. So we began to live in the mind. We built a life upon a fractured foundation. And anxiety is the alarm that tells us, you can't keep ignoring what you feel. Carl Jung went even deeper. Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. In other words, when we avoid the pain that is rightfully ours to feel, we create an artificial form of suffering. Anxiety is often just that. A buildup of unresolved grief. Of repressed rage. Of unlived love. Of boundaries we never learned to set. It's like an emotional pond gone stagnant. And the soul needs movement. The body knows this. It has always known. When your stomach tightens. When your chest constricts. When breathing becomes difficult. It's not your body failing. It's your body screaming a truth your mind can no longer repress. And sometimes, what it screams is this. Don't betray me. Listen to me. Feel. Anxiety, at its core, is a separation from presence. The mind leaps into the future. It imagines scenarios. Invents threats. Simulates rejection. Calculates every possible way you could fail, be humiliated, or abandoned. But it doesn't do this because it's your enemy. It does this because, at some point in the past, being present was too much to bear. And so now, the mind prefers mental exile over the discomfort of the now. But here lies the spiritual paradox. Only in the now can you heal. Only in the body can you integrate. Only in emotion can you release what's been trapped. The ancient mystics understood this. That's why silence was sacred. That's why the body was a temple. That's why emotions were seen as bridges, not obstacles. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Zen master, said, "The only way to free yourself from suffering is to embrace it, like a mother cradling her wounded child." And that is the key. Anxiety is that inner child crying in the dark. It doesn't need to be ignored. It doesn't need to be suppressed. It doesn't need to be diagnosed and numbed with pills before being listened to. It needs arms. It needs space. It needs to be seen, without judgment. But that act, embracing your anxiety, requires what most people have forgotten: presence. And presence can only be cultivated in the here and now. Through the body. Through silence. Through practices that bring you back to yourself. This is where ancient practices like mindfulness, conscious breathing, meditation, introspective journaling, and ritualized movement become real tools of alchemy. They are not trends. They are technologies of the soul. Maps that teach us how to come home. And home is not a physical place. Home is your body. Home is your truth. Home is that moment where you finally stop running from yourself. But most people don't want to return home. Because they fear what they'll find there. And that is what anxiety reveals so intensely. Your fear is not of anxiety itself. Your fear is of what anxiety is hiding. Your truth. Your wound. Your most repressed desire. Your greatest potential. Transformation begins where the escape ends. At some point along the path, something within you begins to change. Not because anxiety disappears, but because you stop running from it. You no longer fight to calm it at all costs. You no longer see it as a threat to be exterminated. You begin to see it for what it really is. An undelivered message. An unheard fire. An uncomfortable teacher. And this is where the shift happens. Anxiety stops being a prison and becomes a door. Gabor Maté summarizes it like this. The symptom is not the problem. It's the attempted solution. Anxiety, in that sense, is a failed attempt to heal. A primitive strategy your system developed to survive in an emotionally threatening environment. But if you truly listen to it, if you look at it with compassion, then something opens. And what opens is not the mind. It's the heart. Transformation begins when you can be with what is, without needing to change it right away. When you learn to breathe through discomfort. When you realize you are not broken. That there is nothing wrong with you. That your anxiety is proportional to the love you didn't receive. To the pain you didn't know how to hold. To the sensitivity you learned to hide in order to fit in. Carl Jung offered one of the most powerful keys to this process. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Anxiety is part of that darkness. But it's not the evil darkness religion once warned us about. It's an ignored, unrecognized, and integrated shadow. And the only way it stops controlling you from below is by facing it in the light of your awareness. This is not theory. It is practice. It is body. It is time. It is ritual. Transformation doesn't happen all at once. It happens through 1,000 small acts of courage. When you stay in silence even though your nervous system screams run. When you dare to say I don't know without feeling weak. When you cry for what you never let yourself feel. And don't judge yourself for crying. When you name your fears, and discover that by naming them, they already lose power. Anxiety begins to transform the moment you stop seeking answers outside. When you understand that the symptom is the teacher. That the tension is the map. That discomfort is the initiation. And like every deep initiation, first comes the symbolic death. The death of the persona you pretended to be. The death of control. The death of the idealized self. And then, the rebirth begins. And it's not a happy, clean, spiritualized rebirth. It's raw. It's slow. It's human. You rise not because the anxiety is gone, but because now, you know what to do when it comes. Anxiety becomes a compass. In ancient spiritual traditions, like Tibetan Buddhism, Sufism, and inner alchemy, it was understood that every intense emotion is simply unpurified energy. Not good or bad. Just raw, waiting for direction. The alchemist doesn't reject the lead of emotion. He turns it into gold. And you can do the same. Your anxiety is condensed energy. If you listen to it, if you contain it, if you breathe through it, that energy turns into clarity, movement, awareness, personal power. But here is the hardest part. You cannot transform anything you're not willing to feel. And that is why anxiety is so powerful. Because it forces you to feel. It confronts you with everything you've postponed. It invites you to mature, to grow, to take radical responsibility for your inner world. And that is an act of radical love. Transformation takes root when you change the question. You no longer ask, how do I get rid of this anxiety? You begin to ask, what part of me is asking to be seen, heard, loved? That change in question is the beginning of your freedom. When anxiety becomes the path, there is a moment, quiet and subtle, when you stop fighting anxiety and start walking with it, not as an enemy, not as a burden, but as a guide. And then, something sacred happens. Anxiety becomes a spiritual practice. It's not about eliminating it. It's about understanding what it's here to teach you. And what it teaches is this: that the peace you desperately seek outside is born from the space you are willing to create within. The ancients knew this. In Buddhism, anxiety is not seen as a mistake. It is seen as an opportunity. A sign that you are clinging to something that no longer serves you. An alarm that says, here lies an illusion that must die. Suffering, they say, comes from resistance to what is. And anxiety is resistance embodied. Tension about the future. Fear of uncertainty. Rejection of the now. But now is all you truly have. And each time you reject it, you move further away from yourself. In that sense, anxiety is not the obstacle. It is the fast track to awakening. But only if you go through it. Only if, as Jung said, you choose to look in the direction you fear the most. Where your fear is, there lies your treasure. And what is that treasure? Freedom. But not the freedom to do whatever you want. The freedom to be with yourself without needing to escape. The freedom to feel without falling apart. To hold your fear without being destroyed by it. To face your chaos, and not panic. That is the kind of freedom no one can take from you. The kind cultivated in the invisible. The kind earned in solitude. The kind that blossoms when you stop waging war against yourself. Anxiety is an initiation. A rite of passage for the soul. And every rite demands a symbolic death. The death of the conditioned self. The death of the wounded child seeking approval. The death of the ego that demands absolute control. But what dies? Makes room for who you truly are. Inner alchemy, as the mystics taught, is not magic. It is psychological. It is learning to transform each obsessive thought into an invitation to be present. Each racing heartbeat into a call back to the body. Each irrational fear into a signal from within. A cry from parts of you asking to be integrated. And this is not something you do once. You do it daily. Hourly. Each time anxiety returns and you choose not to run. And what happens when you choose to stay? Anxiety is no longer a threat. It becomes meditation. Every breath becomes a prayer. Every wave of discomfort, a teacher. Every moment of uncertainty, a possibility. You begin to realize. You are not your anxiety. You are not your thoughts. You are not even your story. You are the space that holds them. The silent witness. The awareness behind the storm. And from that place, nothing can break you. The wound is where the light enters you. Rumi, your anxiety is that wound. And it is also that light. Because it shows you, with brutal honesty, what needs to be healed. What you've denied for years. What, when integrated, becomes strength, compassion, and vision. In the end, you don't become someone new. You become who you've always been. Before the fear. Before the mask. Before the trauma. Anxiety was the messenger. Not the punishment. The bridge. Not the abyss. And crossing it requires something deeper than courage. It requires surrender. Not surrender as defeat. But as a conscious offering to the mystery that you are. As radical acceptance of what is. Because when you finally surrender to feel everything, anxiety no longer has power over you. Because there is no resistance left. Only presence. And presence, that living stillness, is your home. If you've made it this far, it means something within you is already beginning to transform. Not by magic, but by willingness. Anxiety may never disappear completely. But it will stop hurting the same. It will stop scaring you. And with time, you'll discover that every time you opened yourself to it, you came a little closer to yourself. So the next time anxiety knocks on your door, don't run. Breathe. Listen. Maybe, just maybe, what you've been calling suffering was your soul asking to be seen.